Okay, everybody, this is Ken Newhouse, and I just want to welcome our guest, Mr. Frank Somma. Frank is the author of B2B Is Really P2P, How to Win with High Touch in a High-Tech World. And Frank, on behalf of myself and the members of the Get Clients Now Nation, I want to welcome you to the show. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic.
That's awesome. So in light of all that's going on, Frank and I are both in our bunkers, safe and secure. I think, well, I can't say that I'm more safe, but Frank, you're right outside of New York City. Is that correct?
I am, yeah, in central New Jersey.
Yep. And that's, I keep thinking of World War Z. That's almost like ground zero, even though I know it started on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it came from both coasts, actually, if I know that correctly. But anyway, Frank, I appreciate you doing the show today. I know in spite of all the tension that's going on, we're going to have an awesome show today. And if you're ready, let's go ahead and dive in.
All right.
Okay, so one of the first things I do, Frank, and we mentioned this just a few minutes ago, is I like to ask our guests, every guest, the first two questions are the same. So if you could, give us a backstory, take 2 or 3 minutes if you could. How did Frank Somma get from, say, college years or high school years or youth years or whenever it started to where you are now to becoming so popular and so, I mean, your book is a great book, but you do a lot more than just write books. You actually train lots and lots of companies, big companies, and people in communication and a whole bunch of other stuff. But how did you get to where you are now?
It's interesting. I'll give you a couple of flashpoints. So I was not expected to do anything like I'm doing. I grew up, started life in a housing project in New York City. And in my neighborhood, most people were laborers. I hadn't seen anybody in a suit and tie ever. Business people didn't exist. When people told me as a kid, hey, maybe you should be a sales guy, I thought, I don't want to be in Kinney's and Tom McCann selling shoes. I didn't know there was any other kind of salespeople. I really didn't. I didn't know there was a business world out there. It just wasn't part of my life. And so what happened is I was kind of uninspired around 18 years old, and I joined the United States Navy, and I was really blessed to be selected for the Presidential Honor Guard. And during my time at the Guard, I served Carter and Reagan, both Presidents Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan.
That's awesome.
And I credit a lot of the discipline that has helped me to get to do things that I'm doing now from that time in the Guard, because it was a super prestigious, highly disciplined unit. So during that time, my godfather, who was a high school dropout Marine Corps enlistee, wound up as an executive through just hard work and et cetera with Western Union Telegraph. And he convinced me not to take a service job in New York City and rather to go for an interview for a sales job in Western Union. I did. And I think what's important here is I was so filled with gratitude. Like, I couldn't believe that I got to put on a suit and tie and drive to people's businesses, and that the more I did, the more they'd pay me. Like, it was mind-blowing to me that I had business cards in my pocket, with my name on them and a company name. I was a kid that wasn't from this world. So I hustled. I did 5 times what my manager asked me to do every day, because I couldn't believe that I had the opportunity to do this and that I got to show up and go to work every day. All my friends had to go to work every day, and they did these crazy and labor-intensive jobs. And here I was, dressed up, all clean in a suit and tie with cross pen in my breast pocket and visiting business people. It was an absolutely amazing transition for me, and I worked real hard at it. And I think the next flashpoint for me was in the middle 90s when I met a guy who I'm still I'm a business partner with today and still good friends with, Jim Kohler. And Jimmy taught me goal setting. And when I started goal setting in earnest and really sticking with it was in the middle 90s, and it completely transformed the way that I lived and the things that I was able to accomplish. And I guess, one other flashpoint might be my degree in NLP, where I dove deeper into great communication and understanding the personality styles and the ways to communicate with people, and taking the responsibility for that. And here we are today.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who are quote unquote they use NLP, but I haven't met that many people who've actually gone through the official training and have a degree in NLP. And so that's incredible. That's a lot of hard work. I know it is to get through that. It has to be. It's a pretty intense format to go through, but it's incredible. I mean, the things you can achieve just utilizing that methodology. Who are your mentors? Do you have anybody that comes to mind, anybody who really inspired you? I know you mentioned your godfather and some other people, but anybody that really, like, books you've read, or even as a kid, I've talked to people that said, my second grade teacher really inspired me
Yeah.
when I was sitting that really, I'm serious.
Yeah, I know.
And other people, it's like, well, I hear a lot of times it's like my dad or my mom or my parents,
Mhm.
things like that, or a brother or something like that. Anybody comes to mind for you?
Well, in terms of inspiration, I said in the introduction of my book, the fact that I can write is really because my mom, my mother believed in me when it just didn't make sense. When I was a kid, I was a difficult kid. I probably would have been diagnosed with a couple of these acronym kinds of things that kids are
Yeah.
diagnosed with today. But back then I was just a bad kid. So, but my mom never thought that. She had this wan smile on her face whenever I did anything goofy and out of line, and just told me how great I was all the time. So I think my number one greatest influence in my life is my mom. And but going on to mentors, I would say Jimmy, who I just mentioned, who taught me goal setting, is a real good friend still. And another guy, Dr. Rob Gilbert. Rob is a professor at Montclair State, and when I hired him to talk to my sales team back when I was a VP sales with Toshiba, I brought Rob in to talk to the sales team, and I was so enamored with what he did. I asked him if he would come out to dinner with me one night and tell me how to do what he was doing, and that was the beginning of me becoming a professional speaker, was through his tutelage, and we're still really good friends today.
That's awesome. So just one question, and this is not in my list of questions, but I'm very open about this on my show. I've never, other than my time in the military, I've never had a job. I've always I worked for my parents for a little while. My parents just recently, last year, after 45 years, retired and sold their glass company. My dad still wanted to work. I'm like, Dad, you really need, just because he enjoyed it. My dad loves to, one of the things I appreciate about your book are the stories. But my dad
Thank you.
loves to tell people stories. And then I figured, these people have heard the same stories now a couple dozen times. I think it's time. And so finally got them settled down. But with respect to that, Frank, one of the things that I was going to mention to you or ask you is, how did you go from corporate life into like being an entrepreneur? Because I don't know what it's like, other than through, like, vicariously through my wife, the beautiful and talented Lisa, to work in the corporate setting. I know there's a lot of frustrations that go on with that. And me being a person who likes, I won't say autonomy, because I'm a devout Christian person, and so I know that the Lord controls my life. But I do like the freedom of being responsible for the choices I make, and if I want to do something quickly. But just, if you could, just for a minute or two, talk about the difference from going from that environment, even as a VP, which is a significant accomplishment and a huge, I mean, I don't know if that's a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 company or Fortune 100, but that's a huge company, to be in, doing your own gig. What are some of the primary differences that you notice?
Well, I mean, there's things to be said on both sides of that ledger. So the ability to communicate well and convince other people of what your vision is as a leader is super important. And I find that many of the people, I have a private coaching practice, and most of the people that come to me are very high achievers. It's interesting, it just as a side note, that most of the people looking for help are people who believe have already achieved everything. And I think that's a significant piece of life's puzzle, is that the best out there are looking to get better. And I find that intriguing. But anyway, some of these folks come to me, and what they're missing mostly is communication. It's about understanding that people want face time with you. It's management by walking around. It's paying attention and understanding that, letting people know that you care about them. And in a position of leadership, that's what I learned on the corporate side, is that I watched people whose teams didn't do well, or whose employees would leave for a 50-cent an hour raise. And then others who could keep people employed through lean times without raises, because those people would run through walls for that leader. And the difference was the accessibility and the obvious show of care that leader brought to the marketplace. And as a solo practitioner, as a speaker and a coach now, the biggest difference is I had great support in corporate America. I had an assistant. I had a team of people. I could call somebody and say, hey, can you do this spreadsheet now? I have some help. I have a wonderful, talented graphic designer little girl who's now not so little anymore. She's 39. And she does all of my presentation work for me. I have a great web designer who does a lot of work for me, Brian. And so I have people that I can go to job out stuff. But in the end, the biggest difference is I've got to decide the direction, and then I've got to learn things and take the steps and be super uncomfortable, like trying to figure out Amazon advertising. Yeah, it's harder than what I remember high school calculus to be, trying to work my way through that. But you have to learn. If you want to sell books, you've got to understand what that means and how they work, and look at the analytics and figure it out. So I think it's getting comfortable with things that I used to have other folks do for me, I now have to do for myself.
I think that's one of the reasons, in addition to the fact that you're just able to help people really rise to that next level. I think of professional athletes. It's one of the analogies I like to give when people, I just hammer people and not beating them over the head, but I just want to continually reinforce to people that training is critically important. If you look at professional athletes, and from my time when I was younger, not real young, but younger, you look at Mark McGuire, you look at, Ozzie Smith, all these people that, I don't think McGuire will ever make the Hall of Fame. Maybe he will, but Ozzie Smith, all these people, they still went out and took ground balls. And I remember, I was just talking about this the other day, when Ozzie Smith got $1 million a year contract, he was the highest paid baseball player when he got that contract. And now people would be offended at a contract like that, but right. He still went out and trained over and over. They took, infield practice, ground balls, batting practice. Just because you reach the level, you still have to stay sharp. You still have to train, and you should always, and that's one of the things you just mentioned that I noticed, is that people who are really successful got there for a reason. It's because one of the reasons, their desire to want to see what they're capable of and to serve other people. And that was the second point I was going to make. Not only do you deliver in your coaching program, superior results, your clients are just knocking it out of the park with your help, but you really care about the people that you're serving. And so I think that really says a lot about you as an individual and about your character. So if you could take a couple minutes, what I want to do first, we're going to talk about your book, just a brief overview, and then we're going to kind of dig down into some specifics. But if you could take a couple minutes, and why did you write the book? Who's it for? Who could benefit from the book, kind of in a 30,000 foot view? And then from there, we'll dig in some really bulleted points that I think are important that are going to really benefit people today, if they can at least hear these and then implement them.
Well, it's interesting, because what I found in my selling life is that people are focused on the wrong thing. And the reason I wrote the book is because I wanted to put out there a view that if you look out for people, if you learn to communicate better, if you look for what people really need and decide to be helpful, and without getting all woo-woo on you, the world just lines up to help you. And, the book was written because I want salespeople to focus on the things that will help them to get ahead and help them to feel better. I did a LinkedIn post yesterday, again, to remind salespeople, I say this in the book, but, if you have the superpower, if you've got the sales gene, if you're very good at convincing other people to your point of view, you owe it to the world to use that power for good. I mean, Superman could have broke through walls and robbed banks, but he didn't. So I implore salespeople to get out and join a charity organization, something that they care about, do some fundraising, use your skills for good. And the reason that I mention that right now, as we're speaking, Ken, is because that's what the book is about. It's about how to help other people. And it works for salespeople. It works for business leaders, entrepreneurs, managers, team leaders. It's about how to relate to other people, how to size up their communication style and help to facilitate the communication. It's not to label somebody and say, he's this kind of communicator and therefore I'm going to impose this on him. That's manipulative. This is about understanding how somebody sees the world and helping the team, you and them, to get to a place that's productive to both of you, because you understand the communication and you know how to facilitate it. And those are the kinds of things I've attempted to teach in the book.
Okay, and so you said you wrote the book for salespeople. Now, here's where we dig into the weeds just a little bit. Some people are going to be listening to this podcast. Probably half the people that listen are either dentists or in the dental profession. They sell to dentists. A huge amount of the audience is in the dental industry, probably 45% or so. I write for Dental Town. Got about 1.7 million views, or article, not views, but article views on Dentaltown,
Right.
which really isn't that many over the last 10 years. It's really not that many. But having said that, you wrote it for salespeople, and I know people are going to be listening to this, the members of the Get Clients Foundation, and they're going to say to themselves, but I'm not a salesperson. But Frank, there's something I know. When my son at 5 years old convinced me, Dad, we need to go get an ice cream. Son, we're on our way home from school and it's going to be dinner. But Dad, you promised me an ice cream. And so at that point, my son became a salesman. And I don't care what business you're in, whether you're in the profession of dentistry, chiropractic, medicine, you're a coach, consultant, it doesn't matter. We are all in life and in business, we're all salespeople. And so if you could dive into that a little deeper and
Oh, I would love to.
give me your thoughts on that and run with it and take as much time as
I
you need,
would
because
love to. I would
this
love
book really, I felt is for everybody. Really. I don't want to just pigeonhole it down. And like you mentioned earlier, Tom McCann shoes. I don't even know if that place exists anymore, but it rung a bell from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But having said that, run with that.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And the feedback I've gotten from so many people that have read the book has said, oh my goodness, I have to give this to my wife, to my cousin, because it's convincer strategies. It's ways to understand communication and facilitate the communication between human beings. It's kind of like learning a little bit of Mandarin just before your trip to China. You're going to make out better. And that's what this book does. It helps you to facilitate communication with other people. And the truth, what you just said is we're also, I mean, this is called Get Clients Nation. How do you get clients? You've got to convince people that you're the best place for them to go. I went to the vet the other day. The vet has a jar on the desk with a infected heart from a dog, and the clerk says, "Hey, are you giving your dog heartworm meds?" Well, it costs this much. What are they doing? They're selling me on the idea that my dog needs heartworm meds. They have a display, they have a convincing tool, and then they ask. So that's selling. But one of the things that really bugs me is that sales has gotten such a bad name in society. And it comes, this is rooted way back, snake oil salesmen and this kind of stuff. And the truth is that salespeople are some of the highest paid people in the country.
Hands down, absolutely.
And it's because they have a skill set that helps their business to go forward. And without those folks, there is no business. Now, are there people who abuse this? Are there people who run wild with it and maybe aren't as honest as they could be? Or sure, and that's where the reputation comes in. But I'm not, Brian Dennehy and Tommy Boy, and I'm not what's his name, Danny DeVito and Tin Man. I'm a professional. I'm as skilled as I believe that my communication skills are just as well honed and just as difficult to arrive at, and I've studied just as much as my accountant and my doctor. And if the three of us go to a hockey game and we want to sit closer to the ice, we're not sending the doctor and we're not sending the accountant to talk to the usher. We're sending Frank, because Frank's got a better shot at convincing the usher that we should go down closer to the ice. So we all have our own skills. And when I just dropped off my taxes yesterday to my accountant, I wouldn't have anybody but Rick look at it. He's a genius. He knows the law. But I feel the same way about our profession in selling. And I think selling includes any manager that has to communicate with his team that wants to retain good talent. Selling means recruiting good talent from outside of your organization. Selling means convincing your customers that you're the best place to do business with. It's convincing your employees that you're still the best place to work. There's a million applications for entrepreneurs, business managers, and people who are classically labeled salespeople as well.
And so you just touched on something, and again, this is not one of my questions, but I like to ad lib as we go. I'm going to run with this one. So you mentioned your staff. And so in the business environment, and obviously being that this is the Get Clients Now podcast, and we're talking about business and we're talking about communication, it's important that people realize that not only is the business owner, so let's say you're in a dental practice or chiropractic practice, or let's say you have a brick and mortar business, but you got people working for you. Every one of those people, if you're smart, is going to know how to communicate at a high level. They would benefit from this book. And also they're going to know how to sell. So if you could respond to that, what are your thoughts on making sure that not only the person running the business, but every member of that person's team, and I'll take it even a step further. I'm a person who, I had 6 clinics when I retired from the chiropractic profession. I had associate doctors, radiographic techs, chiropractic assistants, management team, administrative team, a marketing team. I had all these different people working for me, and I'm burnt. I don't want to do that anymore.
Right.
I outsource. And so I have a trusted team of people that I work with. I work with a select group of clients. But having said that, I still train the people that I work with, my vendors, to be able to communicate and quote unquote sell on my behalf so that their radar is always up. So if somebody comes along who would be a good client for me, someone who would benefit from, say, marketing automation or a really strong direct response copy, they're going to turn those people on to me. And so talk about that in light of not only your staff, but maybe your vendors as well, making sure that they can communicate and that they're trained to quote unquote sell, persuade, communicate, convince.
Well, Ken, I mean, that's really interesting, the training aspect. And to me, it's the most important part is when you're in the lead position in business is to share the vision. If people don't know what it is and how you do it and why you do it, they're not going to be invested in the company. And that's a super important thing, not only for retention, but for gaining new clients outside. If I used to be in the photocopier leasing and repair business. So if we were instilling pride in the company and I'm sharing the vision with the person who answers the phone who's only been there for 6 months, and they see the passion and they hear how much we care about the customers, and I'm sharing that vision. I'm walking around, I'm asking her how she's doing, and when she gets a phone call from the difficult customer, I happen to be standing there and I say, hey, let me handle that, send that to me, and she sees that I'm handling problems and caring about people. What do you think happens when she's at the family barbecue and somebody mentions their law firm, accounting firm, whatever? Oh, you should deal with my company. They're the best. They're fantastic. She's going to be selling for me because she believes in me, because I took her into my circle, because I shared my vision. And this happens no matter how big your organization is. You've got to make sure that in position of leadership, you're sharing the vision and you're convincing the folks that work for you every day that this is still a great place to work and that your company has the lead in your sector. And I think training them on what you do and them understanding the process rather than assuming that they get it, you've got to show them the inner workings and how things go. And then it becomes part of their consciousness, right? So like you were saying, when they're outside and they hear an opportunity, they recognize it, this idea of being conscious of what's going on and selective attention. If I know about something, let's say I'm an eye doctor and I have somebody who in my organization that's answering the phone, and I show them that I just got this new machine that helps people with dry eyes. And I teach them about that. This is called selective attention. If she were out in the marketplace and just walking around and somebody took a bottle of tears and gave themselves eye drops, she would just walk by and not notice it. But if she knew that you had a treatment for dry eyes, in that moment, selective attention kicks in. You just taught them about this concept. Therefore, they're going to see these things more clearly in their vision. Therefore, they're going to mention something to that person.
I just want to follow that up. Something I learned from Mean Old Dan a long time ago. Frank, you're bringing up a great point about teaching and training, but also, and you can give me your thoughts on this if you want. What about follow-up? So as an example, when I had my practices, I would do team training. And so every week on a Monday morning, everybody from every location would meet in my office, and I would do a team training for that particular group. When I say everybody, not all the employees, all the leaders of each particular facility. And then they would disseminate that information, and then we would follow up. So at the beginning of the following week's training, we would always follow up and verify or check, or like Dan used to say, people will not respect what you don't inspect. Mm-hmm. So I want to follow up to make sure that they got the training. And so I just wanted to, now that I have the opportunity, just throw that in. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the follow-up is super important. You see so many things in companies that they start off on a particular avenue and then it doesn't get followed up on, like you're saying, so it doesn't get enforced. There was I don't know if years ago, the former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, wrote a fantastic book. And in the book, he mentioned that he came up with a system of meeting with the leaders in the various districts of the city, and crime went down markedly. And this it was called CompStat, and they would talk about their objectives, and then they would put the results on the board publicly. Now, these guys didn't get paid any more money if crime went down in their district. This was not a commission-based system, but what it was an awareness system. And when you tell people about something that is a betterment of your company, and better yet, you ask them what they think will be the ideas that better your company. And then as a group, you all have buy-in, and then you publicize that through KPIs or whatever way that you can, so that everyone is aware of the objectives and the results. It becomes part of the collective consciousness, and you're all working toward the same thing. And that's the follow-up that you need.
That's awesome. So let's dive in, if we can. I want to talk about communication, and let's talk about this in the context of selling. And so whether you're, again, a dentist, chiropractor, a coach, consultant, and whether you see yourself as a salesperson or not, the fact is you have to be able to communicate. And so let's clarify a few terms and definitions for communication, and then move into some strategies people can use. And so I don't know who I heard this from, and I know you've heard it as well. You're much more involved, and you've been doing this much longer than I have, but the term verbal vomit, and you and I discussed this briefly before we got started. What's the difference between, we talk about communication? Communication that's bidirectional. That's not monologue. That's called dialogue, correct? Talk about that, and talk about some of the common mistakes you see people making, or some of the misconceptions they have about effective communication.
Well, boy, that leads me in so many different directions. A couple of things that jump to mind right away are, there's a wonderful old expression. Nobody ever said, "I hate that guy. All he ever does is listen to me." It's the people that are constantly talking. And, sometimes salespeople believe that because they may have this mythical gift of gab, as they say, believe that there's something that they say, the things that they say are going to convince people. But really, in the game of gaining customers and gaining more clients, what you need to do is listen and ask more questions, and then listen further and ask more questions. And active listening means being active. It means putting in a grunt where a grunt would be expected, and a nod where a nod would be expected, and a smile where a smile would be expected. Active listening doesn't necessarily mean you're speaking. It means that you're showing clear interest. In NLP, we call it uptime. And when you're looking at somebody and you're communicating non-verbally, and it's things like eyebrow pops. What does that mean? When somebody pops out, hey, they're happy about that. They're surprised. This is wonderful. So there's so many of these little things that happen when you're really into the communication. And it means you're not looking over somebody's shoulder at the next person coming. And it means you're not looking down at your phone, and you're not looking at the ubiquitous televisions that populate our world now. All of these distractions that take you away from listening to somebody will take your relationship further away from being really intertwined. And what you want, if you're going to gain clients, and you're going to, in order to gain clients, you've got to gain trust. And in order to gain trust, people need to like you. And when do people like you? When they're speaking about their favorite subject, themselves. So ask questions and listen. Dale Carnegie taught us about this back in the 30s and 40s, how to win friends and influence people. The great quote from that book that I remember is, "Don't forget that man you're speaking to cares more about his own toothache than he does about a famine that just killed 10,000 people in China." And that's what Dale Carnegie was on to, is that if you want to be an effective communicator, and you want to move somebody from point A to point B for the betterment of you and them, what you need to do is actively listen and kind of hold back your tongue. Think about some of the things that you've had with folks when they're speaking. And you ever talk to somebody and their lips are moving while you're talking? Like, that's maddening. They're just waiting for you to stop so they can say the next thing that they want to say. These are the kinds of things that we've got to pay attention to, and realize that as an active listener, we're completely engaged in what's going on. And I think the lead to all this, Ken, is sincerity. If you're not sincerely interested in other people, Kinky Friedman, a wonderful world-class wise guy, in one of his novels said, "You can't fake sincerity," which is kind of funny. It's faking and sincerity are opposite ends of the
Diametrically
spectrum.
opposed, yeah.
Yeah. So I always found that to be a wonderful little comment. But the truth is, you've got to decide to be sincerely interested in the person you're talking to. And when you're sincerely interested, that comes across. And if you're not, you're fraudulent. You're going to fill these stereotypes that, people that are out trying to get business without being sincere have created throughout our media and movies and things we talked about before. So lead with sincerity and listen really, really well and with purpose.
Okay, and so let's dive into this a little bit more. And if you could, hopefully you're comfortable sharing it, but you talked in the book about some different strategies we could use. You talked
Mhm.
about, I mean, just a whole variety of different, you know, let's talk about
Yeah.
mirroring and modeling and all these different
Mhm.
things that are, I mean, you talked about a lot of this is, we can obviously cannot cover it. And let me just say this. I'm not an NLP practitioner, but I do understand that there are a lot of high level strategies and methodologies within NLP that will help you become an eminently better communicator. Having said that, you're not going to go through, most likely, the training like Frank did and get certified in NLP at that level, but a really good place to start that would give you a tremendous benefit, literally take you many levels higher than where you are now in your communication skills, is to buy Frank's book. And I'll go so far as to say this: you will buy Frank's book, read it, implement what he's got in there. And if you can't say, you'll either be able to say that this has really revolutionized your ability to communicate, your understanding of communication, your ability to be more persuasive. And we're talking about ethical persuasion, obviously. If you'll be able to say that. And if you can't, email me at customerservice@kennewhouse.com and I'll buy the book from you. The book is that good. Um,
Wow. Wow. Thank you.
Now, full disclosure, I didn't finish reading all of your book with all that's going on. I got through quite a bit of your book, but I didn't get all of it done. But I got enough to realize that, hey, this is really good stuff. And so I have no reservations at all. I don't guarantee everybody's work. I don't guarantee everybody's book. But
Wow.
when I come across a resource, again, this is one of those books that, in my opinion, is not something you just want to read like a novel. And you should be reading fiction from time to time. Read your Bible as well. But having said that, this is a resource book. I mean, I've got books like Breakthrough Advertising by Eugene Schwartz. It's a resource. It's one of my
Mhm.
favorite. That is my favorite book when it comes to marketing and advertising that I have in all of the books that I have. But Frank's book's a resource, and use that. But Frank, if we could,
Mhm.
let's dive into some specifics,
Sure.
bite-sized chunks that people can take today and start implementing tomorrow. And I know, guys, a lot of the time, obviously, we're in the midst of this whole ordeal with the coronavirus. We're going to get through it, but these are things you can use. Like Frank and I are online right now. We're on a video call. These are things you can use whether you're in person, face to face, or whether you're over the internet, wherever on the phone. This stuff works. So, Frank, if you're ready, go ahead
Mhm.
and.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the styles that most of us can identify with is what we refer to as a view. I refer in the book as a view from the air and a view from the ground. And it's really interesting. So, Ken, if you know, by way of a really brief example, if I went downstairs after our call and I talked to my wife, and she said, "Well, you know, how's it going? Weren't you on a podcast?" I say, "Sure, I was on with Ken Newhouse. You know, he's a chiropractor, and he's got a bunch of professionals on the line in dentistry and chiropractic and et cetera. And, you know, we went over some stuff in the book, and wow, what a great guy. He actually endorsed the book and said that he'd guarantee the purchase of it. It was fantastic, hon. You know, my wife is not a view from the air, and what I just gave you was a view from the air. So a view from the air person thinks they're answering the question by giving huge chunks of information, and they believe that that's satisfying. But a view from the ground person in the same situation would say, so I went on the Zoom call, you know, with Ken, and, you know, I clicked on the link earlier, and it was, I thought the thing was at 9 o'clock, and it turned out it was 9:30. So I made that mistake. But then I went back and I got on the link at 9:30, and Ken came on, and, you know, he really liked the fishing pictures of the girls behind me because he's a fisherman. In fact, he just went on this trip, and he told me he could see 13 states from this one point that he was up high on this mountain. And so the view from the ground person is going to give you all of these details, and the information in their mind is absolutely essential for you understanding what just happened. So each person thinks that they've delivered the essential information, but when a view from the ground person is speaking to a view from the air person, the view from the air person is rolling their eyes, tapping their foot, pointing their feet away from the conversation, and giving all of these nonverbal signals that say, "Hey, land this plane already. What you know, you're going on and on." And the reverse is also true. A view from the ground person says, well, obviously, you don't think I'm important enough to tell me what just went on. Obviously, you don't think that you can talk to me about your life, and you don't respect me enough to give me the details. When neither of those views are true, they just communicate differently. So what I would say to the folks that are listening is just recognize this. I'm not asking you to change your style. Just recognize this. If you have a view from the air, as I said I do, and my wife who has a view from the ground, what I should do is, can I give a little more color commentary? Can I throw in some more details so that understanding that her style requires a little bit more, I could certainly do that. And when she's speaking to me, can I understand that she wants to give me more detail? And can I focus on her eyes and smile a little bit and understand that she's doing the best she can to give me the information in the best way that she knows how to? Sure, I can get in rapport well enough and actually move that conversation along if I want to. But first, I've got to get in rapport, and I do that by listening well and recognizing the style instead of trying to truncate her sentences and lead her to someplace more quickly, which results only in insults and broken communication.
So I think a really good example of the wrong way to do the complete opposite of what Frank said, if you're listening to a prospective a client, customer, or patient, think of a medical doctor. And I'm not here to bash you guys if you're MDs. Some of my best clients are MDs, not many. But the typical scenario where you go into the medical doctor's office, they don't look at you when you talk to them. They cut you off before they can, and I know they're trying to do their job. They're trying to get the information. But, this goes back to active listening. And so Frank, if I understand you correctly, and you go into this in a lot of detail in the book, give the person you're talking with a little bit of space, a little bit of time, so you can come to a clear understanding of the type of communicator and the communication style they have.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Correct.
And then, just one thing I want to quickly have you just touch on, because I picked up on it, but I'm thinking probably most people didn't. Position of their feet. So if someone's feet are pointing this way or that way, talk about that for just a second, because that's a real subtle thing that most people, I guarantee, well, I don't want to guarantee you, you know more about the subject than I do, but I would assume, based on my limited experience, and I've dealt with a lot of people, but really in the big macrocosm of the world, I mean, it's very limited. Most people aren't going to pick up on that. They're not going to see the importance of noticing things like that.
No, Ken, what's really interesting about all of this stuff is, the levels of learning that we have, right? So we go from being unconsciously incompetent, we don't know what we don't know, to being consciously incompetent. Okay, we recognize that we don't know this. To being consciously competent, we learned about the feet and we're paying attention to them, to being unconsciously competent. So when I learned about body movement and feet, I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a business networking event, and I was speaking to a lovely woman who I had known for a long time. She was a lifelong sales professional, really up, effervescent, full of life, loved to talk. And I had just learned this thing about the feet. And what I had learned was that people don't cross their feet when they're uncomfortable. So if you're in an elevator and somebody standing in the middle of the elevator will not cross their feet, this goes back to your caveman brain. Absolutely. Where you wanted to have both feet firmly planted because you don't know who you're encountering in a strange situation. There are strangers, they could attack you. So you're kind of DNA predisposed to keeping your feet firmly, on the ground. So anyway, I'm talking to this woman, we'll call her Susan. And she crossed her feet in the middle of the conversation. I had just learned this. So I'm looking to see the crossed feet. I go, well, isn't that interesting? Susan's really comfortable with me. So I turned my feet toward the door, indicating subconsciously that I was out of this conversation. Susan picked that up in her subconscious, as we do as human beings, and uncrossed her feet, becoming uncomfortable, planted firmly on the floor. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? I point away, she uncrossed her feet. So then I turned my feet back. I made strong eye contact. I softened up my eyes, and I really started listening. And Susan crossed her feet again. I said, well, isn't that something? So I turned my feet away to make her uncomfortable and started looking over her shoulder, and she uncrossed her feet. To this day, I could not tell you what Susan and I spoke about. No idea, because I was consciously competent. I knew what I knew, but I wasn't good enough to pick it up in the periphery. So I mention that because as we learn these things, like when somebody's feet point away from a conversation, they're about to exit the conversation. And the idea of being comfortable with crossed feet, we have to get to the point as communicators that we pick up these things peripherally without losing the thread of the conversation, which I was unable to do when I first learned this, and hopefully I'm getting a little bit better at now.
Okay, and so some of the questions that I want to ask you, and I've kind of retraced my thoughts here in my steps. So I think it might be a little too much for some people listening. And I want to try to talk to as many people as I can today during the podcast and give them the information that's going to help them the most. What would you say are 3 of the best strategies or methods we can implement now, and then obviously go buy your book and read it and study it and implement and then test and study and implement and test and get better at it? But right now, what are like 3 things you can think of, individual recommendations? I just throw some things out there like mirroring and modeling, leading and pacing, just different. And those are technical terms, obviously, that you're very familiar with. But give us 3, whether it's those 3 or whatever it is, give us 3 things we can run with now, we can utilize.
Okay.
In order of importance at the level, I would say most people are consciously or unconscious competence. I don't think most people are really skilled communicators, at least in my world.
A couple of things that I'll lead with. I think the first one is to meet somebody where they are. So especially in this time, right, where we have people that have different levels of anxiety, for example, right now.
Right.
So if I'm a person who's cavalier about COVID-19 and think that it's all overplayed, and you're a person who's staying home with a mask and gloves on in your own house, we're coming from different places. If I want to help you to lessen your anxiety, I can't say, oh, come on, this is nothing. Don't you remember mad cow disease? Nothing came of that. Take off the gloves already. How's that working? I've got to meet you where you are, right? So I would say the most important thing as a communicator is to meet people where they are. Understand where that person's coming from. Understand what their objection is, what their discomfort is, what their fears are, and then go with that. So, hey, I understand that this has got you really spooked. I can see that you're really bothered about this. Talk to me. Well, if I get it, my kid will get it, and my father's 85 and he's coming over, and what if he gets it and he can't fight it off, and blah, blah. Whatever it is, I want to suss that out first. I want to ask you questions, and I want to meet you where you are. And I don't have to agree with it, but I can certainly understand it. So I could say, I really understand why you feel the way you do about that. That makes a lot of sense to me. It could be that if you washed your hands frequently and you were in your own home, you're probably not going to encounter that many germs outside. So it might be that the mask isn't an essential part of what you need while you're in the house. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm making this up as we go along, right, because of what's happening in our environment today. But the idea of, I can't just say, take off your mask and your gloves. I've got to meet you where you are, and I've got to understand and truly feel what you're feeling and feel sympathetic and empathetic toward what you're feeling. So I would say number 1 thing is meet people where they are. And I think the number 2 thing that will change your life entirely is to really understand what listening means, to pay attention to someone, to make strong eye contact, to not deviate, to not take out your phone and look at it. I don't care if it buzzes, rings, whatever. It stays in your pocket. When I was in my office, I made a habit. I always worked on a laptop, and I made a habit when someone walked into the office to close the laptop screen and turn my chair and face them square up. I didn't do this always, but when I learned it, I began that practice. And the conversations changed entirely, as opposed to, the email flying across your screen in the background, and it takes your attention for a second, your eyes dart over to the screen, then back to the person you're talking to. All of that stuff is an interruption to great communication. So I would say meet people where they are. Don't judge people where they are. And active listening, to really, really dig in and listen. And if you're a person that's trying to get clients, I can tell you that if you had, one of these, let's say you have a 20-minute talk with somebody, the mix should be something like 4 minutes you and 16 minutes them, if you're asking good questions and listening. And that's what'll bring you clients, much more than if you tell them all the reasons they should be your client.
So now, Frank, I'm running through my head. You talk about, I don't have any emails or anything open, but I do have my questions. I've got the camera, and my dilemma is, before, when I had a smaller screen, my camera was mounted right on my monitor, but now my screen in front of me is almost 50 inches. I have this giant television screen, television size screen. Right. And so I don't have a place. If I put my webcam on top of my monitor / TV size monitor, it's like looking down at me and it looks weird. It's like on top of my head
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's so big. So I've got you and myself on the video here on the left side.
right.
The camera's like 2 inches to the left of that on a stand. And then over here to the right of your video, and my natural tendency is to look at your face, which is
Right.
not in line with my camera.
Same with me.
To the right over here, I got my question. So when you see my eyes dart over, and I know that wasn't for me, but when I'm darting over here, I'm reading my next question to make sure I'm staying in order. And sometimes, well, most of the time I just ad lib it as I go. But there are certain questions that I definitely want to ask particular people. But what's the one question? And let me just say this, because I think you hit on something really, really important. We don't have to agree necessarily with a prospect or a client, a customer, or patient, but we do have to understand them if we want to make that connection that it's going to, even if it's not at the conscious level, where they're going to be able to understand, hey, this person really values me because they're giving me their focused attention on me and what's important to me. And they're not just trying to bowl me over and sell, or convince, or persuade. They're actually investing time understanding who I am. And I think that's a point that we really want to pay attention to and not let it just fly by with all the other great information you've given us. If you will invest the time to pay attention, focused attention, and understand the people you're talking to, that's going to go a long way to your success. What do you think about that?
I think more than anything else that you can do as a sales professional or as a business owner, entrepreneur, if you want to bring more clients into your business and continue to grow your business and continue to thrive, you've got to listen well. And that goes with prospective clients as well as your employees. It's the number one skill that will help to advance your business. And I think that it's also being deteriorated at a really great rate. And it's kind of natural, in the world that we live in with the interruptions that we have right now, that this would happen. But I believe that we're losing this ability to invest time. We're living these snippets of moments as opposed to taking the time to really listen to somebody. So it goes a long way if you do invest that time.
And I think it makes it I think that makes that particular skill much, much more valuable in the eyes of your prospective client, customer, patient, because of the fact they're conditioned to be dealing with people today who can't. I mean, I remember way back when smartphones really didn't exist, but people were still checking their pagers or whatever else. And I'm like, and so it was a policy, hey, that goes in your purse or it doesn't come out. I'm not going to sit here while you check messages or answer your phone. That we don't do that here. And are you expecting an emergency call? No. So in light of the fact that we live in a world where everybody is checking their phone constantly, which is incredibly rude, in the middle of a conversation, you become much more credible, in my opinion, when you don't do those and you give the focused attention, like you said, and you cover this, like I said, in great detail in the book. Guys, buy the book. It's that important. So Frank, I'm going to ask you two questions. The first question is a question that I ask everyone. You have time for two?
Oh, sure.
And then the second question is, we need to know more about you, your work, how to get in touch with you, how to, access the stuff you're doing, how to, more about your coaching, things like that. So here's the first question. What's the one question today that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one, Ken.
In light of what we've been talking about, communication, and I know obviously, again, the caveat is this is such a huge, huge topic. I mean, you've given so many pearls today, which I appreciate. I really do, because I know it's going to benefit people. And you cover a lot of this in just intimate detail, hold you by the hand, walk you through step by step in the book. And you give great stories, which stories really help. I mean, it's not just dumping information like a textbook. The stories really help and make a huge difference. But what's the one thing I should have asked you in light of our conversation?
How this stuff doesn't work. So I've given you a bunch of techniques here, and they don't work all the time. And when they don't work is when they're overused and too obvious. So this is not something that's contrived. It's something that needs to be come into your bones, first of all, in order to do it well. You got to have it in your bones to do it well. And that only comes from being genuinely interested in God's greatest creation, other people. Be genuinely interested. Everyone's got something to share. And when you walk into a conversation being supremely interested in what that person is saying, it comes across in your eyes and your facial tones, and people are picking up, we're trained in NLP to look at things like breathing patterns and color fluctuations, and this part of your eye I'm pointing to the little place where you would dig a sleeper out of your eye, for those of you that are listening. That's called the inner canthus, and we look for that to disappear, and there's all these things that they teach you in people that read body language, like FBI great Joe Navarro, who I learned so much from, and Pam Barnum, who does a lot on trust and body language. And all of this stuff people do naturally. When someone's talking to you and you're speaking to somebody else, you're picking up all of these signs and you don't even know it. You're not saying, oh, I just saw some color come up in that cheek, but you picked it up and you sensed that someone was either angry or embarrassed. And you adjusted the way that you spoke because of that. So, in NLP and in my book, I teach you how to look for these kinds of things and facilitate better communications, and how to assume rapport before rapport is actually established, so that you can get in quicker rapport with people. But my caveat is, it can't be contrived. You can't use these things without sincerity. If you try, like I teach a technique in the book called backtracking, where when someone says a statement, if you have someone who's reticent to speak, you wait for them. When they say something, you gently repeat the last couple of words they said with a little question at the end. And so what shouldn't you have asked me, Ken? If I said that, you would elaborate, and it's a way to get people to talk. Well, I had a woman in a seminar that I taught this to, who came back to the next session. I was training her company, and she said, that backtracking doesn't work. I went home and I did it with my husband over dinner, and he said, why the hell are you repeating everything I'm saying? Well, because you're in a comfortable communication pattern with your husband, and what you just did was what we call a pattern interrupt, a severe pattern interrupt, which he went, what the heck is going on here? So all these things have to become natural and gentle, and they don't work if they're forced.
And just real quick, guys, and a pattern interrupt, I'll leave it up to Frank's book to teach you that if you don't know it. It's a tremendous skill to have. It's very simple, many different ways to deploy it. If you've got a person who's rambling, you ask a question, because as an example, being in the setting of asking a patient a question, sometimes the patient doesn't know what you're looking for, and they'll just keep rambling and rambling and rambling. And so that's where a pattern interrupt can really save you time and embarrassment, and save the patient embarrassment and things like that. I just inhaled my coffee a minute ago, Frank. That's what I kept doing, pushing my microphone back in. I'm having allergies. The allergy season is just now starting. So
right.
Hopefully it's not, I don't think it's the other thing. I think it's my allergies. But anyway, okay, so how can we learn about Frank Somma? How do we get in touch with Frank Somma? FrankSomma.com. Somma has 2 M's. Tell us what we need to know. Guys, buy the book. Frank, tell us the title of your book, and then we'll talk about your coaching.
Sure. So the book is called B2B is really P2P, which means business to business is really person to person. How to be high touch in a high tech world, which is just my way of saying that to get more personal. People do business with people they like and people they trust. And my book aims to help people to become more likable and more trustworthy. What is this wonderful thing we all know as charisma? Well, break it down and figure it out. And that's what I try to do in the book, is to teach people how to be that more charismatic, more likable person, so that they can advance their business and their career. And again, to do it with sincerity. The book's available on Amazon. It's available in paperback as well as digitally. You can also get it on my website. And for the folks that are listening now, if you do go to the website, it's less expensive, because I'll give you a coupon code, which is success. So on checkout, just put in the coupon code success.
Does it matter if it's capitalized or small, lowercase, or just?
No, just
okay.
Success, and that'll take $5 off the cover price, and there'll be free shipping. So
sweet.
You can get it on my website. Just go to the store on my website. And
Thanks for doing that.
And I come, I mean, I spend a lot of my time one-on-one coaching or speaking to groups, whether they be, I'm talking to, for example, a lobbying firm down in DC, teaching their folks to get clients more easily. I'm talking to a law firm to help their folks be better on the phone. So it depends on, it kind of, communication crosses basically every business. So I'm in big conferences. I was just in Big I, New Jersey, where I was the keynote speaker at the end of their conference. So if you're listening and you're intrigued by anything that you've heard here, you can reach out to me for things like speaking at a meeting or training at a company or one-on-one or group coaching.
Frank, I think I want to try to connect you, and I'm not sure how many dentists you've worked with or people who sell to dentists, but if not, try to brush up on that, because I'm going to try to connect you with Howard Ferran. He's the CEO and founder of Dentaltown. Okay. Dentaltown is the largest platform in the world online for dentists and dental professionals, but he's also the CEO and founder of OrthoTown, HygieneTown, and he's also in private practice. He's got an MBA. His podcast is Dentistry Uncensored. Mm-hmm. He's got 6 million downloads.
Holy Toledo.
Yeah, so he is like the premier guy in the dental industry. Most people love him. Some people don't like him, but that comes with the territory. Mm-hmm. But I really think we can get your exposure to the dental industry a little bit so that you can be a little more familiar. And I know you've probably got a ton of friends that are dentists and professionals that can get you right. And I'm sure you probably even work with people in this setting. But I'm going to go ahead and email his son and recommend that you be on the show. And then at some point, I'm going to take this and turn it into an article. And when I say some point, like 2 weeks after the show comes live. But I'm going to put this on Dentaltown as well, because I think, like you said, this would benefit any person who's in business, and really whether you're in business or not, if you want to be a better communicator. And I just really want to do that. But I want to introduce you to Howard. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think this would resonate well. He's kind of, and I'm going to edit this part out. He's a bit crass. He's a very smart guy, but he's a bit crass. You'll pick that up immediately. Got kind of a, I won't say weird sense of humor, but off color sense of humor. But okay. The guy knows everybody who knows everybody. And the reason I would like to try to get you on his show, I had to wait 3 months to get on his show, and he's been on my show, but he's connected with everyone. And this could lead to, which I'm hoping, getting you keynotes in front of at some of these conventions where there could be, and right now in the foreseeable future, those aren't happening, but at some point they're going to start again. Yeah. And, dental conventions, you could have, 3, 10, 15, 20,000 people. Like when I spoke at the ADA conference, I don't know when that was, like 10 years ago, maybe, with the beautiful and talented Lisa. It was in Vegas, like 75,000 dentists and dental people there.
Wow.
Yeah. The whole strip was like people from the dental industry.
Right. A lot of good smiles.
Yeah. Unless you're, I don't know if I'll cut this part out. Unless you're a dentist over in Europe. It's amazing to me. Some of these people that are dentists in Europe have, like, we call them Euro teeth, but obviously I'll let this off. And then one last thing I want to say, and then I'll clip this part out and put the other part of it in. It really is a pleasure for me to listen to a master communicator, because like in that last segment you just gave, obviously I probably missed most of it, but some of the stuff I did pick up on. You're really good. And so I did appreciate, well, I mean, who am I to say to you that you're really good? I'm just a regular Joe, but I know enough a little bit. Nice. But
you do. And I appreciate the introduction to the dental world. It's really funny because I attend the American Society of Hematology convention every year because of my involvement with the Cooley's Anemia Foundation and that charity. And I'm always amazed at the presentations that I see. And part of me, I just wish that I could split myself, another piece of me off and create another business, because I just see this need of teaching these professional scientists who are the smartest people I've ever met how to get their point across, because it doesn't matter how much you know. If nobody's listening, they're not going to learn. And these guys don't know how to be listened to. And I watch presentation after presentation. I say, boy, I wish I could coach this guy on how to do this better. And I think that translates really well to in the offices, on people with patient care, like you were talking about before. That it's hard. You've got to see what, let's say you're working for an organization and you're a medical professional and you're seeing somebody every 15 minutes or whatever. You've got to get it done. Your book is filled. You're backed up. If you don't get this guy, the next guy's 10 minutes later and later and later. And before you know it, you're an hour behind and people are angry and so on and so forth. But the idea of being able to communicate effectively and to connect with somebody so that you get the good information that you need in the time that you need it is super important. And I fear that most professionals are not trained in that element of life. And I think it's super important.
They're not, and it is important. It is critically important because like I tell people before, I've never met a dentist or a chiropractor or like an MD, like a lot of these professional people that are dummies. I mean, these are highly intelligent, highly educated people, but they're missing key components or elements of the framework for success. And success is making sure your patients get well. But if you don't have patients, or if you don't have clients or customers, I don't care how good you are, you're not going to succeed in business. Just a quick note, I'm going to wrap. We're going to wrap. That is, to me, it looks like, I don't think it's a channel catfish over your left shoulder, but that does look like a catfish of some sort. I can't really tell what it is.
That's a bullhead in a local pond.
I was going to say a bullhead because it isn't that big, but it looks, the way I know it's a catfish, I can't really see the head is totally flat, but I can see the forked tail. And so I know my game. I know my fish, and I can't see what the little girl behind you is over your right shoulder.
It's not facing the right way, but that's just a little sunfish.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's nice to have those pictures of when they were little. So cute girls.
Oh, yeah.
And they're a little older now.
Yeah, my young one is, you would really enjoy speaking with her. She's a holistic health counselor, and she owns a yoga studio. And
have her email me. I'll have her on the show. Yeah, I would love to.
She just went to. She was the first one in our area, but as soon as the virus hit, she converted all of her yoga classes to Zoom classes, and her teachers are teaching virtually. And people are loving it because they still get their yoga, even though they don't want to be confined in a studio, using things that other people just use. So, and she just knows her stuff. And what's most interesting for me about her, Ken, is that she's got thalassemia major. So she's got this fatal incurable blood disease, and she's living well with it. And, she's maintaining her health. She's 35 years old now. And, but, here's the sick kid teaching other people how to be healthy. And I just think it's a wonderful thing.
What's her name?
Her name is Alicia Ann. Her last name is Hodgkin now. She's married.
Well, have Alicia Ann email me and I will have her on the show.
Absolutely.
ASAP. I would love to do that for her. I would love to do that for her and for you.
Yeah, she's great.
And then anybody else you got that you mentioned earlier, I'd love to have them. Just make sure you have them email me, and we'll get it set up and we'll expedite it and get it done. But that's awesome.
Oh,
that's
great.
Really awesome. Hey, listen, I really appreciate you being on the show today. I really do.
I enjoyed it so much. You're fantastic. You've been
a great guest. Can we do this? And I normally ask ahead of time, and I didn't, and I forgot. Could you just give me like 30 seconds of feedback on what your thoughts were on the show, so that people who are considering being on my show. So if you could take 10 or 15 seconds and just, how was the experience today being on the show? And would you recommend to other potential guests to be on the Get Clients Now podcast with me?
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. What I enjoyed so much about it is that you're well-versed in a lot of different subjects, which means that you can relate to many of the things I'm saying. And I picked that up immediately because you understood what a pattern interrupt was. And you took the time to familiarize yourself with the book, so you weren't unprepared. You asked great questions, and you led me into my areas of expertise, which I'm excited to talk about. So the show is going to be better because I'm passionate and up, because you led me to the areas that I love to talk about. So yeah, it's a great experience. I think you did a really terrific job.